Hey, shalom, brothers and sisters. Welcome back. I thank you again for joining me today. Well, today I want to get a little spooky with you and talk about the supernatural signs for the temple's destruction, the second temple in 70 AD. Uh, well, there's reports, eyewitnesses, reports like in the Jerusalem and Babylonian Talmud, plus a couple other sources that discusses this supernatural phenomenon that begun right after Yeshua's crucifixion, after he was crucified, clear up to 40 years later, 70 AD. And I want to read some to you, read this to you. And some of the resources, like I said, comes from the Talmud, some comes from other sources, but it's very interesting to the least. Okay, there were four miraculous signs in particular that the apostles and the Jewish people witnessed in the 40 years before the destruction of the temple, and the historical accuracy of these four signs are recorded in both the Jerusalem and Babylonian Talmuds. This shows that the knowledge of these four special signs was well recognized by the Jewish authorities in the period when the Talmuds were compiled. It is now time that all of us who desire to know the history of Palestine in the first century be made aware of those outstanding warning signs. These signs all started with the exact year in which Yeshua was crucified, and anyone with any common sense should be able to tell that they were signs from Yahweh that had their significance beginning with the very year of the crucifixion of Yeshua. The fact is not only important for Christians to know, but it is equally significant for all the Jewish people today. What were these signs? Okay, first note what the Jerusalem Talmud has to say on the matter. The following translation is that of Jacob Neusner from his book, the Jerusalemia, pages 156 to 157. And he states here, 40 years before the destruction of the temple, starting in 30 CE, the Common Era, the western light went out, the crimson thread remained crimson, and the lot for the eternal always came up in the left hand. They would close the gates of the temple by night and get up in the morning to find them wide open. Said Rabbin Yohan ben Zakkiah to the temple, O temple, why do you frighten us? We know that you will end up destroyed. For it has been said, open your doors, O Lebanon. Lebanon's a symbol of the temple in Jerusalem because of the Lebanese timbers that were made out of it, that the fire may devour your cedars. And it's Zechariah 11, verse 1. And then in the Talmud, it's Sotah, chapter 6, verse 3. Let us now look at what the Babylon Talmud has to say, quoted by the Sonsino version. Our rabbis taught during the last 40 years before the destruction of the temple, the lot for the eternal did not come up in the right hand, nor did the crimson-colored strap become white, nor did the westernmost light shine, and the doors of the Hekel would open by themselves, until Yohanan ben Zakkiah rebuked them, saying, Hekel, Hekel, why wilt thou be the alarmer thyself? I know about thee that thou wilt be destroyed. For Zechariah ben Iddo, the prophet, has already prophesied concerning thee. Open thy doors, O Lebanon, that the fire may devour the cedars. And in the Talmud, that's Yoma 39b. Okay, the four signs are precisely the same in both Talmuds, and both state that the signs began in the year 30 CE, which is the very year which Yeshua was crucified. As explained earlier in this book, there was another important historical event which happened to the Jewish nation that occurred in the same year. Let me record again this chapter. 40 years before the destruction of Jerusalem, the Sanhedrin, or the Supreme Court of the Jews, was banished from the Chamber of Hewn Stones in the temple. There was a section of there's a part of the temple that was reserved for the Chamber of Hewn Stones. It was where they conducted their judgments and everything. And sat in the trading station, also in the temple, but east of its former location. And that's in the Shabbath 15a. As let's see, it's explained in the early chapter, the move of the official Sanhedrin from the Chamber of Hewn Stones near the altar of burnt offering in the temple could be accounted for by the falling stonework that was over the entrance of the Hekel, which is the holy place, which supported the curtain that tore into two at the time of the crucifixion of Yeshua. Something must have happened to the vaulted structure called the Chamber of Hewn Stones that rendered it unfit for the Sanhedrin to enter from 30 CE onward. The earthquake at the crucifixion would well have caused the damage. No other explanation that is discernible in the historical records makes sense. This would mean that the last trial ever to be held in that prestigious and beautiful building on the Temple Mount was that of Yeshua. With the event which destroyed the beautiful chambers of the Supreme Court, which Sanhedrin, on the Temple Mount, there began a series of important signs that the temple and its ritualistic system were destined to come to an end. The apostles of Yeshua would have been well aware of these signs, as were the Jewish people of Judea. Indeed, the signs were looked on as being most important to the Jewish authorities. The four signs involving the temple were interpreted by Yohan ben Zakkiah, the most important rabbi at the time, as being warnings that the temple was to be destroyed. This witness of Yohanan was significant because he lived both before and after the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. He was the most important person in the Jewish hierarchy during the period after the destruction in 70 CE. He became head of the new seat of the Jewish government, which was established after 70 AD at a place called Jamnia, about 30 miles west of Jerusalem. His witness and interpretation is paramount to justify the reliability of the occurrence of these four signs. One thing must be noticed by us all: Yohanan ben Zakkiah and all the later rabbis for the next 400 years maintained that these four signs in the temple were given by Yahweh to denote the coming destruction of the temple, not that the people had gone over to Christianity or some other reason. While the four signs commenced precisely with 30 CE, the year Yeshua was crucified and resurrected from the dead, none of the signs were associated by Yohanan ben Zakkiah or the later rabbis as a disapproval from Yahweh because of the arrival of Christianity. The Jewish rabbis at the time saw no displeasure on Yahweh's part with the vast numbers of Jewish people who had gone over to the belief of Yeshua in the 40 years following the crucifixion. James stated that tens of thousands of Jews then believed the gospel, and you can find that in the book of Acts, chapter 21, verse 20. Indeed, it was because the vast majority of those Jewish Christians turned away from the faith of and in Yeshua that Peter and Jude wrote their epistles of warning to the Jews, 2 Peter and Jude, that their erroneous actions would lead the nation into becoming desolate as were in Sodom and Gomorrah. The truth is, Yeshua had foretold just 2 days before his crucifixion that Jerusalem and the temple were destined to be destroyed. He had also told the authorities that he himself was the new temple and that he, being the new temple, would be raised from the dead after 3 days. You can find that in the Gospel of John, chapter 2, 19 through 21. All Jewish Christians who believed Yeshua were looking for the destruction of the physical temple that existed in Jerusalem. And Yohanan ben Zakkai, who lived at the same time of the apostles and afterward, also knew that Yahweh was prophesying the destruction of the temple by the 4 major signs that were given at the time. Now we're going to look at them again. The Babylonian Talmud lists the first sign as being that in which the lot for the eternal did not come up in the right hand, and that's in Yoma 39b. What was meant by this? The Holy Scriptures speak about this ceremony in Leviticus chapter 16, verses 5 through 34. On the Day of Atonement, 2 identical goats were brought before the high priest, and lots were cast over them. One source says the lots were in the form of a white and black stone. The white stone was for the eternal, and the black was for the scapegoat. The priest would put his right hand into the receptacle containing the 2 stones, and without looking down, select a stone with his right hand and place it over the right hand of the goat. The Babylonian Talmud says that in the previous 200 years, the stone would be sometimes white, sometimes black, as most people would have expected. It's like random. But beginning in 30 CE, the very year which Messiah prophesied the destruction of the temple, and the very year of his death and resurrection, the right hand of the high priest selected the black stone every time for 40 straight years, believe it or not. The odds of a black stone coming up 40 times in a row are almost astronomically in scope. And according to Pascal's table of binomial coefficients, it's a table of odds first devised by the French scientist Pascal, who lived from 1623 to 1662 CE, in which he showed odds in a pyramid style. The odds of this happening under normal circumstances would be 1 chance in, let me take the numbers here. You got a 1, 0, 9, 9, 5, 1, 1, 6, 2, 7, 7, 7, 6. And that's a high number right there, real high. But the Jewish records show this rare phenomenon occurred with regular consistency for 40 straight years. The apostles would have been well aware of this occurrence, and with each year passing, with the same consistency of the black stone coming up in the high priest's hand, they would have been amazed with its significance. Some Jewish authorities at the time and later were also impressed. That does not conclude the matter. Both Talmuds also report another sign from eyewitness accounts that boggles the imagination. Also beginning in 30 CE, the very time of Messiah's crucifixion, the western light of the menorah, which is a 7-branch candle stick, but went out for the same period for 40 years. This menorah was positioned with its 7 lamps facing north. The western lamp was that which was next to the Holy of Holies, and it was the most important for that reason. In fact, we are told in the Talmud that at dusk, the lamps that were unlit in the daytime, the middle 4 lamps remained unlit, while the other 2 eastern lamps normally stayed lit during the day, were to be reignited from the flames of the western lamp, which was a lamp that was supposed to stay lit all the time. It was like the eternal flame that we see today in some national monuments. Josephus, citing an earlier historian, said that on the temple menorah there was a flame that was supposed to be kept lit night and day. This western lamp was to be kept lit at all times. For that reason, The priest kept extra reservoirs of olive oil and other implements in ready supply to make sure that the Western lamp, under all circumstances, would stay lit. But what happened in the 40 years from the very year Yeshua said the physical temple would be destroyed, and the very year that Yeshua became a new resurrected temple for the Jewish people and for the world? Every night for 40 years, the Western lamp went out, and this was in spite of the priests each evening preparing the Western lamp so it would remain burning at night. This is eyewitness Jewish testimony. Now, using the chances according to Pascal's tables again, see which shows that there can only be one chance, and there's that number again for the black stone to come up from the right hand for 40 occasions. Okay, imagine what the odds would be for the Western lamp that was supposed to be the eternal flame for the nation to go out each of the 365 days of the year for 40 years. The odds of that happening are so astronomical that even mathematicians would stagger at trying to show a normal decimal answer like that given in Pascal's pyramidical illustration. But that is still not all. For 40 straight years during the single generation following Yeshua's crucifixion, the crimson strap never changed its color to white as it had often done in the previous 200 years. This is a ceremony not mentioned in the Holy Scriptures, but it was associated with the Day of Atonement from at least the time of Simon the Righteous. He's an honorable and upright high priest who lived in the 3rd century BC. It was noticed that in the Day of Atonement, when Simon would go into the Holy of Holies, that a crimson-colored thread that he had in association with this person miraculously turned white for the 40 years he was priest, and that the lot of the Eternal was also came up in his right hand, and that's in the Yoma 39b. It appears that this positive indication in both ceremonies, with the white constantly in evidence of the time of Simon the Righteous, became a pattern for future signs to the Jewish people and showing Yahweh's appraisal of the temple and its rituals. They came to believe that these signs showed Yahweh's pleasure or displeasure with their activities. This is because of a special sign given in the year of Simon the Righteous' death that showed what the white and the black indications were intended to mean. Note how the Jewish rabbis came to understand these things. And quote right here, our rabbis taught, in the year in which Simon the Righteous died, he foretold them that he would die. They said, whence do you know that? He replied, on every Day of Atonement, an old man dressed in white, wrapped in white, would join me, entering the Holy of Holies and leaving it with me. But today, on the final Day of Atonement that Simon performed as high priestly duties, I was joined by an old man dressed in black, wrapped in black, who entered, but he did not leave with me. After the festival of tabernacles, Simon the Righteous was sick for 7 days and then passed away. And that's again in the Yoma 39b. Okay, from that moment on, the priest began to notice that the lot of the Eternal, which was the ceremony ordained in the Old Testament, would come up randomly, one time white and one time black. But that was not all. The crimson thread would sometimes also turn white, and other times it would remain its crimson color. This procedure prompted the Jewish rabbis to interpret that if the crimson thread turned white, then Yahweh approved the Day of Atonement rituals every year, and Israel could then be assured that they were forgiven of their sins, as the Holy Scriptures stated. Thus, these traditional rites of the crimson-colored thread of the biblical ceremony of the black and white stones were established as official signs of Yahweh's pleasure and displeasure. But note this, with the year 30 CE, the crimson thread never turned white again, and the white stone never came up in the right hand of the high priest for the period of the 40 years from the time of Yeshua's crucifixion until the complete destruction of the temple of in 70 CE. And yet still there was even one more. There's even more to relate to the historical records of the early rabbis. During the same period of 40 years, the doors of the Hekel, the doors in the back of the temple curtain that tore in two at Yeshua's precise time of death, were found to be opening of their own accord at night during the time of the temple was off limits to the people. Both the Jerusalem and Babylonian Talmud state that this opening of the Hekel doors was something that happened throughout the whole period of 40 years, and recall the fact that these signs were vouched for by no less than Yohanan ben Zakkiah, the top rabbi after the fall of Jerusalem, who was an eyewitness to all things that had happened in the temple for those 40 years before its destruction. By reckoning all these four signs together with their multiplied occurrences as being mere coincidences, and that they happened in a natural and normal way, is entering the realm of patent absurdity. The odds of those things occurring by chance are so astronomical that to express the odds in a linear decimal fashion would stretch the limits of human terms to reckon it. But that these four signs were directly from Yahweh, and that their wonderful consistency of the actions was showing the coming destruction of the temple that Yeshua foretold, is something that made sense to the early rabbis who lived from the time of the temple's destruction and for almost 400 years afterward. The apostles would have also been knowledgeable of these matters, and that's pretty much what it is right there. It's kind of mind-boggling. The Bible don't really mention this, but it's coming from, like I said, source comes from Josephus, and the other ones come from the rabbis themselves. What happened and what occurred, and I just figured I just wanted to share that with you. It's documented, eyewitness accounts, and there's no reason for the rabbis, the Jewish people, to lie about it. It's a phenomenon. It's baffling. It's no mere. It couldn't be no mere coincidence. The astronomical numbers state that right then and there. But anyways, I just wanted to share that with you. And comment below. Let me know what you think about this. And also, will you please subscribe and hit that notification bell? Give me a big thumbs up. I really would appreciate that. And it's a pleasure talking to you, and it's a pleasure hearing from you. So with that all said and done, I thank you again for joining me. Until we meet again, brothers and sisters, peace out and shalom.